Lena had always felt trapped in her own home, but tonight, the weight of her father's anger pressed down on her like a storm about to break. The argument had started with a mired disagreement, as so many did, but it had quickly escalated into a torrent of shouting and flying objects. Lena ducked as a ceramic vase shattered against the wall, shards scattering like icy rain across the wooden floor. Her mother had long since stopped intervening, retreating to her room with a quiet resignation, but had always terrified Lena more than her father ever could. Tonight, though, Lena decided she would no longer wait to be caught in the storm. She had packed a small bag with the essentials, a change of clothes, a few coins her grandmother had slipped her, and a tattered notebook filled with sketches and secret thoughts she had never dared to share. Each item felt like a lifeline, a fragile tether to a world beyond the walls of her suffocating home. As she slipped out the back door, the cool night air hit her face, and for a brief moment, Lena felt an intoxicating sense of freedom. The moon hung low and pale in the sky. Its light barely penetrated the thick canopy of trees that lined the village outskirts. Her bare feet pressed into the damp earth, leaving faint imprints that would soon vanish with the morning dew. She moved quickly, guided by instinct rather than thought, driven by a mix of fear and adrenaline that left her heart hammering against her ribs. The familiar paths of the village became shadows in the night, and every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the rustling of leaves, the whisper of wind, felt magnified, threatening, alive. Hours seemed to stretch as Lena ran. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she could not stop. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint echo of voices, probably villagers preparing for the early dawn, but their presence only deepened her isolation. The further she ran, the more unfamiliar the surroundings became, until she found herself at the edge of a forest she had only ever passed by in daylight. Here, the trees grew tall and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like the hands of unseen specters. Shadows pooled between the trunks, and the darkness seemed to hum with secrets. Lena hesitated for only a heartbeat before pressing on, knowing that any delay could give someone, her father, or worse, time to catch her. Then she saw it. A house, crumbling and ancient, standing like a sentinel at the forest's border. Its windows were dark, its walls covered in ivy and moss, but it seemed solid enough to offer shelter, if only for a temporary stay. Lena approached cautiously, every step echoing on the cracked wooden porch. The door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting her in, and she felt an odd mix of relief and unease. Something about the house felt alive, though she could not explain why. Perhaps it was the way the wind seemed to circle around it, whispering through the broken shutters, or the way the shadows inside shifted as though watching her. Lena shook the feeling away and stepped inside, desperate for any semblance of safety. The interior smelled of damp wood and rot, a scent that immediately made her stomach churn. Dust motes floated in the pale moonlight that filtered through the cracked windows, settling on the furniture and floors. Lena's eyes roamed the room, taking in the broken chairs, the sagging ceiling, and the cobwebs that hung like delicate curtains. She set her bag down with a trembling hand and sank to the floor, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in her mind. The quiet was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional groan of the old house settling in the night. Every creak and whisper of movement sent a shiver down her spine. For hours, Lena sat in the corner, listening to the wind and trying to slow her breathing. She thought of her family, of the life she had left behind, and of the uncertain path ahead. Fear mingled with exhaustion, and for a moment, she almost wished she could return home, even to the chaos she had fled. But the memory of her father's rage, the vase shattered across the floor, the sharpness in his eyes, reminded her why she could never go back. She was alone, yes, but alone was safer than being trapped under that storm. As she began to drift into a restless sleep, A soft sound broke the silence. It was almost imperceptible at first, a faint scratching, like claws against wood. Lena froze, straining her ears, telling herself it was the wind. But the sound grew louder, deliberate, moving through the house with a slow, patient rhythm. Her pulse quickened. Something was here with her, in the shadows of this abandoned place. She could feel it watching, and for the first time, she realized that her escape had not led her to safety, but into the unknown. The wind moaned through the broken windows, carrying with it a chill that seeped into her bones. Lena hugged her knees, listening as the house seemed to breathe around her. The scratching continued, now joined by a low, guttural noise she could not identify. Panic rose in her chest, but she forced herself to stay still, hoping that whatever it was might ignore her if she remained quiet. Her eyes darted toward the staircase leading upstairs. Darkness pooled there, thick and impenetrable, hiding whatever lurked beyond. She thought of retreating, of escaping back into the night, but fear had a grip on her body, and her limbs refused to move. The night pressed in on her, a living entity, whispering secrets she was not meant to hear. And then she heard it, a faint, almost human laugh coming from the darkness above. It was soft at first, almost playful, but under it lay a hunger, a malice that made her skin crawl. Lena's blood ran cold. She realized, with a sense of horror, that the house wasn't abandoned. She was not alone. The thing in this house was awake, and it had been waiting for someone like her. The thought made her stomach twist and her chest tighten. She had run from one nightmare to stumble into another. One far older, darker, and far more dangerous. Lena stayed huddled in the corner, too terrified to move, as the laughter faded into the shadows, leaving the house eerily silent once more. She clutched her bag tightly, wishing she had never left home, wishing she could undo the steps that had led her to this cursed place. But deep down, she knew she could not go back. Whatever waited in the dark house, whatever had hurt her, would not forgive trespassers. Lena's night of escape had only just begun, and she was about to discover that the world outside her father's rage held terrors far worse than she had ever imagined. The house seemed still at first, as if it had forgotten how to breathe. But Lena soon realized the silence was alive in its own unsettling way. Dust clung to every surface, and the faint smell of decay filled her nostrils. She had been crouched in the corner for what felt like hours, listening to the strange rhythms of the old house, trying to convince herself that nothing was there. Yet every shadow seemed to pulse with movement. Every floorboard held the potential for hidden footsteps. She rose slowly, her legs trembling, and forced herself to explore, hoping to find a safe corner or, at the very least, a clue about who or what lived here. The kitchen was the first place she investigated. Old pots and pans hung from the ceiling, rusted and coated in dust, their surfaces reflecting the weak moonlight like dull eyes. A stack of bowls lay on the counter, filled not with food, but with raw meat, some of it rotting, the scent almost unbearable. Lena gagged and stepped back, her stomach twisting. Along the walls were bundles of dried herbs tied with string, their pungent aroma mixing with the decay to form a stifling cloud. She reached out to touch one, her fingers trembling, but recoiled when a small insect scuttled across the counter. Something about this arrangement felt deliberate, purposeful, as though the house itself had been prepared for some dark ritual. Her eyes darted toward the living room, where the furniture was covered in sheets thick with dust. Chairs were stacked haphazardly, and the remnants of old rugs lay torn across the floor. Lena moved cautiously, feeling the boards creak under her weight. It was then she noticed the scratches along the floor and walls, deep grooves gouged into the wood, as if some animal or something far worse had clawed its way through here. A cold shiver ran down her spine. This was not merely a house left to decay, it had been used, and the marks were recent. A sudden noise upstairs made her freeze. At first, she thought it was the wind rattling the broken shutters, but then came the faintest echo of a footstep, deliberate and slow. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. Another footstep, closer now, followed by a low, almost imperceptible growl. Lena swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm, though panic burned at the edges of her mind. She tried to reason with herself. Perhaps it was an animal, a stray dog, anything but what her instincts whispered. Something inhuman. Her curiosity, however, outweighed her fear, and she began to move toward the staircase. Each step was deliberate, measured, but her bare feet made soft thuds against the wood. The house seemed to respond, the shadows shifting in ways that did not make sense. Shapes moved at the edges of her vision, elongated and fleeting, vanishing when she looked directly at them. Her breath caught. She had never believed in ghosts or monsters, but the air here was thick with malevolence, a presence that seemed to breathe alongside her. In a small hallway, she found a mirror cracked down the center. Her reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, but there was something else behind her, a flicker of movement, a dark shape that vanished the instant she turned around. Panic gripped her. She realized with a sinking feeling that she was not alone. The house had an inhabitant, and it had been watching her since the moment she entered. The realization made her blood run cold. She wanted to flee, to run back into the forest, but fear and exhaustion rooted her in place. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows and making the walls groan. Lena moved cautiously into what had once been a dining room. A long table stood in the center, its surface scarred and splintered. On it lay bones, small, brittle, yellowed with age, and more scraps of raw meat. Her stomach lurched. She stepped back, only to see shadows dance across the walls, elongating and twisting as if the house itself were alive, stretching toward her. She stumbled over a loose floorboard, sending a sharp crack echoing through the space. The shadows paused, as if acknowledging her intrusion, and then continued their sinister dance. Suddenly, a soft creak came from the far corner of the room. Lena's eyes followed the sound to a heavy door slightly ajar. From beyond it came a low, wet breathing, irregular and terrifyingly close. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath, willing herself to disappear. The breathing stopped, replaced by a soft, almost human laugh, high-pitched and mocking. Her skin crawled. The sound was deliberate, intelligent, aware of her presence. Lena realized that she had stumbled into the home of a predator, one that did not hunt with teeth alone, but with patience, cunning, and cruelty. Her mind raced. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her, tales of creatures that walked like humans by day but became monsters by night. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Could it be that she had run straight into such a creature? She tried to push the thought away, but the proof was all around her. The meat, the herbs, the scratches, the deliberate arrangement of death and decay. She had entered a trap, blind and desperate. Lena sank to the floor in the center of the room, hugging her knees to her chest. Her eyes darted constantly, searching for movement, listening for every sound. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. In the darkness, time had lost meaning. Then came another sound, a faint shuffle from the staircase, followed by a low, wet hiss that made her stomach turn. Her breath caught in her throat. She had no weapon, no means of defending herself. All she could do was watch, frozen,
as the house revealed itself not as a shelter, but as a predator, alive with malice and hunger. As the first hints of dawn began to gray the edges of the broken windows, Lena realized that leaving would be far more dangerous than staying hidden. Whatever had been moving in the darkness was patient, intelligent, and aware of her. She had no choice but to wait, to plan, to survive. But one truth was undeniable. Her escape from home had only brought her into a deeper nightmare, a place where the darkness was alive, and something watched, always watching.
Night had fully claimed the house, wrapping it in a suffocating cloak of darkness. Lena's body pressed against the wall, her heart hammering like a drum in her chest. Every sound was amplified: the creak of a floorboard, the faint whistle of wind through the broken shutters, the soft patter of unseen feet. She tried to convince herself it was only her imagination, but the evidence was undeniable. Shadows moved where shadows shouldn't, flickering across walls and ceilings with the life of their own. Lena had never felt so small, so vulnerable. Fear coiled tightly around her chest, constricting each breath. She had run from her father's rage only to stumble into something far worse, something ancient and hungry. Her eyes, adjusting to the darkness, began to pick out shapes. The furniture no longer seemed inert. Chairs twisted at odd angles, tables groaned as if burdened with invisible weight. In the corner of the room, a pile of rags seemed to shift, a faint silhouette passing through it like smoke. Lena forced herself to breathe evenly, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. She had to think. Hiding alone in the open was a death sentence. Slowly, she crept toward the kitchen, hoping that perhaps she could find a place to barricade herself, or at least something to defend herself with. The kitchen was worse than she had remembered. The bowls of raw meat still sat on the counter, glistening in the weak moonlight like bait. Dried herbs hung in clusters from the ceiling, their shadows dancing grotesquely across the walls. Lena noticed small, claw-like marks etched into the countertops and cabinets, scratches so deep they seemed almost deliberate. A wave of nausea hit her. Whoever or whatever lived here was not human. This was a predator, and Lena had wandered straight into its lair. The wind rattled a window pane behind her, producing a sharp, echoing sound that made her jump. She swallowed hard and pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as the air seemed to grow heavier, denser, as if the house itself were closing in around her. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and coming from above. Lena's pulse raced, each beat echoing in her ears. She could not see the source, only sense it. The floor above groaned under the weight of something moving, something deliberate. A low, guttural growl followed, vibrating through the floorboards and into her bones. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but the thought of leaving the room, stepping out into the open, terrified her even more. She crouched low, clinging to the edge of a counter, trying to make herself invisible in the shadows. The steps stopped. Silence pressed down on her. Lena held her breath, straining to catch any sound, any hint of the creature's movements. Then came a noise that made her stomach turn. A scraping, slow and wet, like claws dragged over wood. She turned her head slightly, and in the corner of the kitchen she glimpsed it. At first, it seemed human, its shape tall and thin. But the longer she looked, the more impossible it became. Its arms were elongated, ending in sharp, spindly fingers that seemed designed to tear flesh. Its eyes glowed faintly, an unnatural red that seemed to pierce through the shadows. Its mouth, partially open, revealed teeth that were uneven and sharp, glinting faintly in the dim light. Lena froze, paralyzed by the sight, unable to look away, unable to move. The creature sniffed the air, a low hiss escaping its throat. Lena's mind raced. The stories her grandmother had whispered in hushed tones came flooding back. The ASWANG,
a shape-shifting monster, human by day but a predator by night, capable of consuming anything in its path. And now, here it was, stalking her, circling her, waiting for the moment to strike. Every instinct screamed to flee, but her legs refused to respond. She was trapped, caught in a nightmare that she could neither understand nor escape. Time became meaningless. She could hear her own heartbeat, erratic and loud, but the creature's presence seemed to dominate the room. She tried to breathe quietly, to make herself as small and invisible as possible. The Aswang moved closer, its form shifting slightly as it stepped, a blur between human and something inhuman, monstrous. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, patient. It circled, sniffing, testing, learning. Lena realized that hiding was not enough. This predator did not merely rely on sight or sound. It sensed her very being, her fear, her presence. Desperation surged through her. She scanned the room, looking for anything to defend herself. A heavy cast-iron skillet lay on the counter. With trembling hands, she gripped it, ready to swing if the creature approached. She remembered another detail from the stories. Light could repel it, and so could certain herbs. She scanned the hanging bundles, unsure which ones might help, while keeping her eyes on the shifting shadow that stalked the kitchen. The air itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the house was aware of her thoughts, mocking her attempts to plan an escape. The Aswang stopped directly in front of the counter, its head tilting unnaturally, sniffing. Lena's heart raced, and she realized it could see her, could sense her fear, could understand that she was aware of it. Every second felt like an eternity. And then, almost imperceptibly, it hissed, a sound that was both human and animal, full of malice and hunger. Lena's fingers tightened around the skillet. She knew she had to act, yet the creature moved with a patience that was terrifying, aware that it held all the power, that any mistake on her part could mean the end. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching the skillet like a lifeline. The Aswang circled once more, and Lena could feel the weight of its gaze, its awareness pressing down on her. The room seemed to shrink around her. Shadows deepened, the air grew colder, and the creature's red eyes glowed brighter, a promise of the danger that awaited her. Lena realized with a chilling certainty that this night would not end until one of them had claimed victory. And victory for the Aswang meant her life.
The house seemed to close in around Lena as the shadows grew darker, heavier, almost tangible. Her lungs burned, not just from fear, but from the frantic movements she had made trying to stay ahead of the creature stalking her. Every corner she turned seemed to hold another horror. Every hallway stretched endlessly into darkness. Her bare feet pressed against the cold, splintered floorboards, and she could feel the house vibrating with the Aswang's presence. She had learned quickly that it was patient, waiting, sensing her every move. Escape was no longer a simple matter of fleeing. She was trapped in a predator's playground, and each second increased the danger. Lena's first thought was to find a door, a window, anything to lead her out into the night. But as she approached the kitchen and peered toward the broken windows, she realized they were nailed shut. The air was thick with the sense of rot, meat, and something far more sinister, a metallic tang that made her stomach churn. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to think. Her grandmother's stories returned in fragments. Garlic, salt, and light could repel the Aswang, at least temporarily. Her eyes scanned the room desperately. A bundle of dried herbs hung low from the ceiling, and some salt from an old container lay forgotten in the corner. It was a meager defense, but in this house, it was enough to give her a fighting chance. She grabbed handfuls of salt and scattered them across the doorway leading to the hallway, praying it would create a barrier. The Aswang hissed when it approached, recoiling slightly, but the sound of its heavy breathing was all the more terrifying. Lena's heart raced. She knew this creature was intelligent, aware, and relentless. It would not be fooled by a simple trick for long. Its eyes glowed brighter in the darkness,
fixed on her as if measuring her fear, calculating the exact moment to strike. She gripped a large knife she had found in the kitchen drawer, her knuckles white, and pressed herself against the wall. The room itself felt alive with malevolence, the shadows twisting and stretching toward her as if reaching for her very soul. Suddenly, the Aswang moved with alarming speed, leaping toward the doorway she had tried to block. Lena barely had time to lift the knife before it lunged. The creature's claws scraped the floor, leaving deep gouges in the wood, and its low, guttural growl shook the walls. Lena swung the knife instinctively, striking something that felt wrong, wet, and alive. The creature hissed and recoiled, its glowing eyes narrowing with a predatory focus. She had no time to think about the wound she might have inflicted. She had to move, had to survive. Her instinct screamed at her to run upstairs, to find a new hiding place before the creature fully recovered. The staircase loomed before her, dark and treacherous. Lena climbed quickly, her hands scraping against the splintered railing, her feet slipping on the worn steps. Behind her, the Aswang followed, silent for a moment, then with a sudden screech that echoed through the house, chilling her to the bone. The sound was neither human nor animal. It was a scream of hunger, of rage, of something inhuman. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she forced herself to keep moving. Each step upward felt like a small victory, but the oppressive presence of the creature reminded her that she was far from safe. Reaching the top floor, Lena found herself in a narrow hallway. Doors lined either side, their paint peeling and their wood warped. She slipped into the first room she could find, a small attic chamber, and slammed the door behind her. Darkness swallowed her immediately, but it offered a fleeting sense of safety. She pressed her back against the wall, listening. The house groaned around her, but the Aswang's presence was momentarily elsewhere. Her hands shook as she searched the room, finding an old lantern. Dust choked her as she struck a match and lit it. The warm glow illuminated the attic, casting long, flickering shadows that danced along the walls. To her relief, the creature seemed hesitant, lingering at the threshold of the doorway. The light had brought her a small reprieve. Lena's mind raced. She had survived this long by instinct, but she could not continue hiding forever. The Aswang was patient and cunning. It would wait her out if it had to. She needed a plan, even a desperate one, and she had to act quickly. The lantern's glow illuminated corners of the attic she had not yet explored. Old wooden beams lay across the floor, and a few loose boards might serve as weapons. She could hear the Aswang stirring outside, sniffing, sensing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every second was an eternity. Belina understood the cruel calculus of the predator. Hesitation was death. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The Aswang's low growl came again, a sound that made her stomach twist. It moved around the room below, testing the boundaries of her makeshift barrier. Lena gripped the lantern and raised it high, swinging it in a wide arc. The Aswang recoiled, a hiss escaping its throat, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. The stories were true. Lights could repel it, at least temporarily. But she knew it was only a matter of time before it adapted, before the hunger overcame its caution. She had to escape, to find a true exit, or she would be trapped here forever. Breathing deeply, Lena scanned the attic one last time. A small trapdoor in the corner offered a possible way down to the forest beyond, though it looked precarious and dangerous. She had no choice. Clutching the lantern and the knife, she approached the door, her hands trembling, her heart hammering in her chest. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her as she lifted the hatch. With a deep breath, she forced herself into motion, praying that the next step would bring freedom rather than death.
The attic offered only a brief reprieve, a fragile barrier against the relentless presence of the Aswang. Lena's breath came in ragged bursts, her body trembling from exhaustion and fear, yet she knew she could not remain still. The creature's patience was formidable, its intelligence terrifying. It would wait, study, and strike at the precise moment her defenses weakened. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of wind through the broken windows felt amplified, a warning that her time was slipping away. She had to move, had to act,
but the house itself seemed intent on slowing her, twisting the hallways and staircases into an endless maze of shadows and menace. Lena's eyes roamed the attic, searching desperately for anything that could serve as a weapon or an escape. Old wooden beams lay across the floor, splintered and heavy. She grabbed one, feeling the rough wood bite into her palms, and balanced it like a makeshift staff, ready to swing with every ounce of strength she had. Her ears strained to catch any sound of the creature moving below. The low, wet hiss echoed through the floors, and she could feel its awareness pressing upward, testing her hiding place. Panic surged, but Lena forced herself to focus, knowing that fear could be fatal. Survival required precision, vigilance, and courage she never knew she possessed. The lantern in her hand flickered, casting a warm glow that stretched the shadows across the walls. She had learned that light could repel the Aswang if only momentarily. It paused at the edge of the doorway, its glowing eyes narrowing, hesitant to fully enter the room. Lena seized the moment, swinging the wooden beam with controlled force at the nearest corner of the attic, creating a loud crash that echoed through the house. The Aswang hissed in frustration, recoiling from the sudden noise, and for a fleeting instant, Lena felt a surge of empowerment. She had forced it to hesitate, proven that she was not entirely defenseless. Yet even as hope flared, she understood the truth. This was only temporary. The creature would adapt, and she had no time to waste. Her mind raced for a strategy. The small attic window offered a potential escape, but it was narrow and high. Lena could climb through, risking injury or exposure to the forest below, or she could continue searching for another exit. Every instinct screamed that the longer she remained inside, the greater the risk. She could hear the Aswang shifting below, testing her barriers, its low growl vibrating through the floorboards. Time had become a weapon against her. Hesitation could cost her life. With shaking hands, she decided to take the risk. She adjusted the lantern to illuminate the space, revealing the rough wooden frame of the window. Carefully, she removed the screen and hoisted herself toward the narrow opening. As Lena squeezed through, the Aswang's hiss rang out, sharp and furious. She landed on the cold, uneven ground outside, scraping her knees and palms against the earth, but relief flooded through her. For a moment, she thought she had escaped, that the nightmare of the house and its predator had ended. But the creature's screech echoed from the attic above, a chilling reminder that her fight was far from over. Its howl carried through the night, a promise of relentless pursuit. Leah's pulse quickened. She could not stop, could not linger. She had to put distance between herself and the house, between herself and the Aswang. The forest beyond stretched dark and foreboding, trees twisting into unnatural shapes under the pale moonlight. Every step was treacherous. Roots snagged her feet, branches whipped her face. Yet she ran, driven by pure instinct, propelled by the terror of what she had left behind. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and every rustle in the underbrush made her flinch. She forced herself to ignore the pain, the fatigue, the ache in her legs and lungs. Her mind focused on one thing alone: survival. Each step forward was an act of defiance, a refusal to succumb to the hunger and malice that haunted the house behind her. Behind her, the faint echoes of the creature persisted, though they began to fade as she pushed deeper into the forest. She dared not look back, fearing that even a glimpse would ignite a panic that could cripple her. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind remained sharp, scanning for paths, for obstacles, for anything that might give her a chance to escape fully. The forest was no sanctuary. The shadows seemed alive, whispering threats in the wind. But it was better than the house, better than the waiting terror that lurked within. Eventually, Lena found a small clearing, moonlight illuminating the damp grass beneath her feet. She paused only briefly, inhaling the cold night air, her chest heaving. Her hands trembled violently as she gripped the wooden beam and the knife, scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. The forest was quiet now, but she knew better to trust the silence completely. The Aswang's patience was legendary. It might wait, biding its time for the perfect opportunity to strike. Lena could not allow herself to linger. She needed to move, needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and the house, between herself and the predator that had nearly claimed her life. With one last glance toward the shadowed tree line, Lena resumed running, her body fueled by fear, adrenaline, and the desperate need to survive. The night pressed around her, but for the first time since she had entered the house, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. She had fought, had survived, and had escaped the immediate danger. Yet deep in her mind, a chilling awareness lingered. The Aswang was still out there, patient, cunning, and aware. The battle was far from over.
The forest stretched endlessly around Lena, a maze of gnarled trees and shifting shadows. Every step she took seemed to echo louder than the last, every rustle in the underbrush a potential threat. Her lungs burned with exhaustion, her legs ached from the relentless flight, but she dared not stop. The aswang screech from the house still lingered in her ears, a reminder that her nightmare had not fully ended. The night was alive, dark and suffocating, and Lena could feel it pressing against her, testing her resolve. She clutched her wooden beam and knife tightly, the rough wood biting into her palms, a tangible link to survival in a world that had become unrecognizably dangerous. She moved quickly, her feet sinking into the damp soil, branches clawing at her face and arms. The moon offered only fleeting light, filtering through the thick canopy and pale, broken beams. Every shadow seemed to shift unnaturally, every sound amplified to a level that made her heart pound faster. She knew the Aswang was capable of incredible speed, of tracking her through scent, sound, and an almost supernatural awareness. Fear and exhaustion combined to create a tunnel vision that focused only on the path ahead, each step a desperate attempt to put distance between herself and the predator that had nearly claimed her life. Lena's mind replayed the events in the house, the way the Aswang had moved with calculated patience, its glowing eyes fixed on her, as if it could see into her very soul. She shivered, remembering its elongated arms, the sharp spindly fingers, and the hiss that had vibrated through the wooden floors. The lantern, the salt, the herbs, they had bought her only a temporary reprieve. The Aswang had adapted, learned, and tested her limits. Each moment of hesitation had almost cost her life, and she understood with chilling clarity that the creature would continue to hunt her until it either succeeded or she escaped completely. Her ears caught a faint snap behind her, and her body froze. For a split second, she considered turning, but the instinct for self-preservation won. She could not afford to look back, could not allow herself to be distracted. Whatever had made the sound might have been a branch, a small animal, or perhaps the creature itself, testing her. Lena forced herself to focus on the forest ahead, on the thin path of moonlight that offered the slightest sense of direction. Every step forward was an act of courage, a declaration that she would not succumb to fear, that she would survive this night no matter the cost. Hours seemed to pass as she ran, though time was meaningless in the dark forest. The world had narrowed to the crunch of leaves beneath her feet, the rasp of her breath, the thrum of her heartbeat. Sweat and blood mingled on her skin from scratches and scrapes she hadn't noticed in her haste. Yet, despite the pain, a flicker of hope emerged. The trees began to thin, and in the distance she glimpsed the first hints of open land, the faint silver of a river reflecting the moonlight. It was a promise of freedom, fragile but tangible. Lena pushed herself harder, legs burning, lungs screaming, driven by the knowledge that every step brought her closer to safety and further from the house of horrors. The forest seemed to resist her progress, branches snagging her clothes, roots tripping her steps, shadows dancing at the edge of her vision.
She ignored it all, focusing on the small clearing ahead. The riverbank would offer visibility, a way to move without the immediate threat of unseen predators lurking just beyond the trees. Lena's heart surged with determination. She would survive. She had fought, had evaded the creature, and she would continue to fight until she was far beyond its reach. The adrenaline coursing through her veins made her senses hyper-aware. Every sound, every movement, every whisper of the wind became a guide, a tool, a warning. Finally, she reached the river. The water glistened under the moon, a silver path cutting through the darkness. Lena crouched briefly, catching her breath, feeling the cold river breeze against her skin. She scanned the forest behind her, but there was no sign of the Aswang. The clearing offered temporary safety, a moment to regain her strength. She pressed her hands against the grass, savoring the sensation of solid ground beneath her, real and tangible, unlike the shifting horrors of the house and the forest shadows. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself a small, cautious breath of relief. Yet Lena knew the danger was not gone. The Aswang was patient, relentless, and aware. It would continue to pursue if given the chance, and the forest was vast, hiding countless threats. She could not linger. Moving along the riverbank, she kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, alert for any sign of pursuit. The night was still alive, but now it felt different, less like a predator and more like a test. Lena had survived the house. She had survived the forest. The next challenge was reaching her village, reaching safety, and ensuring that this nightmare could not touch her again. With one last glance at the darkened forest behind her, Lena pressed on, each step steady, deliberate, and full of cautious hope. The swang's screech had faded, replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves in the wind. Freedom was close, tangible, yet the memory of the house and its monstrous inhabitant remained vivid in her mind. She had escaped the immediate threat, but the terror would remain with her forever. And as she moved along the river under the pale moonlight, she understood that survival was not merely about outrunning a predator. It was about enduring, about holding on to courage, and about never letting fear take control.
Dawn crept slowly across the horizon, pale and hesitant, as Lena staggered toward the outskirts of her village. Her body ached from the relentless flight through the forest, her muscles screaming in protest with each step. Every joint throbbed, her skin was scratched and bruised, and yet the adrenaline that had kept her alive the night before still pulsed fiercely through her veins. She dared not rest, for she knew the Aswang's patience was endless, that even now it could be stalking her through the shadows, lying in wait for a single misstep. The memory of its glowing eyes, its elongated arms, and its twisted form haunted her with a vividness that made her shiver uncontrollably. The forest began to thin, and the familiar outlines of fields and paths emerged in the morning light. Birds began to stir, their calls tentative, and the first hints of warmth from the sun fell upon her bruised skin. Lena forced herself forward, but the relief of seeing the village in the distance was tempered by the realization that she had been changed irrevocably. She had survived the night, but the terror she had endured was etched into her mind, into her very soul. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow cast by the rising sun carried the echo of the Aswang's presence, and she could not shake the sense that the creature had marked her, that it had left a part of itself inside her awareness. By the time she reached the edge of the village, she collapsed against a fence post, gasping for air, her hands shaking violently. Villagers passing by gave her startled looks, murmuring amongst themselves. No one approached. The exhaustion and fear in her eyes warned them that she was not merely weary, but carrying a story they would not understand. Lena felt an overwhelming urge to tell someone, anyone, about the horrors she had endured, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain the supernatural presence that had hunted her? How could she convince anyone of the Aswang's existence without sounding insane? She shook her head,
swallowing the lump of fear and uncertainty that had formed in her chest. Survival had been her only goal, and for now, that goal had been achieved. Her home appeared familiar yet alien, the streets of the village bathed in the gentle light of morning. She stayed on the outskirts, avoiding the people she passed, the whispers of children playing and neighbors chatting filling her ears like distant echoes. It was tempting to run straight to her house, to seek the comfort of the familiar. But even as she thought it, Lena knew she could not. The memory of her father's rage, of the night she had fled, was too fresh, too dangerous. And more importantly, the shadow of the ASWANG'S still loomed in her mind, a reminder that safety was fragile, temporary, and that true peace might never exist again. Days turned into weeks, yet the terror of that night refused to fade. Lena avoided the forest edge entirely, taking longer and more convoluted paths to school and the market. She kept garlic and salt with her at all times, superstitions she had once dismissed but now relied on like talismans against unseen danger. Her sleep was fitful, plagued with dreams in which the ASWANG appeared, stalking her relentlessly through endless hallways, shifting from human to monstrous form in moments, always aware, always hungry. She woke in cold sweats, her heart racing, her hands trembling, and she realized that the house and the creature within had imprinted themselves onto her very psyche. The trauma was not merely physical, it had claimed her mind as well. Villagers began to whisper about the abandoned house at the forest edge. No one dared enter after sunset, and rumors grew of a creature that haunted the ruins, waiting for trespassers. Lena avoided the topic entirely, keeping her distance, though her curiosity, mingled with terror, occasionally drew her eyes toward the darkened tree line. She understood with painful clarity that she had been lucky. The ASWANG had not pursued her beyond a certain point, but its awareness of her, its hunger, remained. She had escaped physically, but the experience had left a permanent mark on her soul. Even in moments of relative peace, Lena remained vigilant. Every sound, every shadow, every fleeting movement at the edge of her vision reminded her of that night. She could no longer walk blindly through her village or sleep without preparation. Garlic by the windows, salt along the thresholds, careful observation of the surroundings, all became routines she could not abandon. The ASWANG had taught her lessons that were harsh, terrifying, and indelible. Survival was no longer a passive state. It was a constant, meticulous practice, and one mistake could cost her everything.